I got married to my wife 5 years ago. For both of us, it was our second marriage. I don't have kids from my first marriage, but my wife has a daughter. When I first met my wife, my stepdaughter was 16. Even though I don't have any kids of my own, I understand that teenagers are moody and independent. I didn't expect her to warm up to me right away. When we started dating, I didn't see her much because she was busy with high school and cheer practice. The few times I did see her, she was cold and uninterested in getting to know me. At first, I thought she was just shy and would eventually warm up to me. However, even after a year of dating my wife, things were still the same. During that time, I learned more about my wife's previous relationship with her daughter's father, which wasn't great. He cheated on my wife multiple times before she left him. My wife didn't tell her daughter about the details because she was young, and it wasn't appropriate. Naturally, my stepdaughter adored her father and didn't understand the situation, leading to anger towards her mother for the divorce. My wife had sole custody because her ex moved abroad and didn't want to be part of his daughter's life. My stepdaughter, around 8 at the time, blamed her mother for the separation. Her father had visitation rights but rarely showed up, worsening the relationship between my wife and her daughter. They had regular fights, and my stepdaughter threatened to run away from home. I found out about all this in the first year of dating, so I went easy on her. She wasn't ready for another father figure. I was the first guy my wife dated seriously after her divorce, so I was the first man my stepdaughter saw with her mom. My wife and I got married after 2 years of dating, but my stepdaughter was never happy about our relationship. Despite my efforts, she was always cold and often nasty, saying I'd never be her real father and that she'd never talk to us again once her dad came back. When my stepdaughter turned 19, her dad moved back to the States and reached out to her. She decided she didn't need her mom anymore and cut off contact, saying she was happy with her dad. My wife and I didn't take her seriously at first, thinking her dad would disappoint her again. However, we lost almost all contact with her for a year. My wife tried reaching out multiple times, but my stepdaughter wouldn't respond. We even drove to her college, but she refused to see us. My wife was heartbroken and even tried talking to her ex, but he brushed us off. We were at a dead end and things seemed hopeless. Then my stepdaughter called to say she was engaged and dropping out of college to support her boyfriend while he builds his business. This was quite shocking. Despite her bratty behavior, she had always been a great student, earned a full scholarship to college, and dreamed of becoming an architect. The engagement was even wilder to me than her dropping out. My wife tried her best to convince her to rethink her decision. She managed to get her to come home with the guy at least once. When we met him, we were taken aback. He was arrogant and rude, and his business plan seemed foolish to me. I couldn't understand what she saw in him. After dinner, my wife asked to speak to my stepdaughter in private, so I took her fiancé out to the garage for some beers. I asked if he was the one who encouraged her to drop out, and he just shrugged, saying it was none of my business and that she was an adult who could do whatever she wanted. He also pointed out that I wasn't paying for her education. It was a snarky response to a reasonable question, but I let it go. We had barely spent half an hour together when my stepdaughter barged in, saying they were leaving, and it was a mistake to come home. They left before I had a chance to say anything. I rushed at my wife, who was very upset. Like any rational parent, she had tried to talk to her daughter about taking some time to think before making such drastic decisions for a guy she had known for hardly a year. My stepdaughter lashed out, saying horrible things like my wife had no right to speak since she didn't pay for her tuition. As I mentioned, she had a full scholarship and had no idea what a good wife should be like. This deeply hurt my wife, who had been a victim of abuse. After that incident, we decided to cut off contact until she apologized, though we knew that was expecting a lot. My wife remained hopeful for a reconciliation, and I supported her, even though I wasn't very optimistic. But no one could foresee what was coming. 6 months ago, my worst nightmare came true. It was a cold day, and we had been receiving a lot of snow. My wife was driving back from work, and the roads were very dangerous. It still feels like a bad dream as I write this. Her car skidded on an icy turn and crashed into another vehicle. She died on impact. The devastation I felt cannot be described in words. She was, and always will be, the love of my life. I still cannot imagine spending my life without her. I miss her every single day. After the initial shock, I realized I had to break the news to my stepdaughter. I couldn't imagine doing it over text, so I called her again and again, but she wouldn't pick up. I texted her saying it was an emergency about her mom, and even then, she didn't respond. So I did the only thing I could think of. I reached out to my wife's ex-husband. I told him what happened and asked him to make her call me back immediately. Sure enough, she called me within half an hour. I broke the news, and there was just silence on the other end. I was terrified, but after a few moments, she said she was on her way home. She attended the cremation and memorial, but hardly spoke to me. Before leaving, she told me I was no one to her now, that her mother was gone, and asked me not to contact her again. I foolishly thought this tragic event might bring us closer. My wife left some of her savings to her daughter, but left the house to me. I didn't know I would be getting the house until our lawyer told me. I asked her to inform my stepdaughter since any communication from me wasn't welcome. I heard she reacted angrily and said some unkind things about her mom. It baffles me how someone so young can be so full of anger, but it's not my business. It's been about 8 months since my wife passed, and I'm still getting used to life without her. I decided to turn our house into an Airbnb. It's a beautiful property, decorated by her, but I've only recently started to get back to normal. I haven't had any contact with my stepdaughter since, and I expected never to see or hear from her again. So imagine my surprise when I opened the door yesterday and saw her standing there. It was Sunday, and I was having a lazy day by myself. I wasn't expecting anyone, let alone her. It took me a moment to get over the shock. She looked quite different with bright red hair, cut short, a big change from the long, curly blonde hair I'd always known. I invited her in, and we sat in the living room. After an uncomfortable silence, I realized she wasn't going to say anything, so I started some small talk, but she only gave one-word replies. Finally, I asked her why she was there and mentioned that if she was looking for any of her things, she wouldn't find them because I had gotten rid of everything after my wife passed away. When my stepdaughter first moved out, she took almost everything worth taking and told us to throw away the rest. My wife couldn't bring herself to do it, but after she was gone, all that stuff annoyed me, so I donated what I could and threw away the rest. She said she didn't care about any of that and was here for a different reason. She needed a place to live because she had divorced her husband and her dad had moved out of his old place and wouldn't pick up her calls anymore. She didn't know where he was or how to reach him, apparently because he was dating someone much younger now. This was a lot to take in. The last time I saw her was when my wife passed away, and it seemed like she and her husband were still together. I didn't even know she had gotten married, let alone divorced. I asked her when it all happened, and she said they had gotten married in Vegas before her mom passed away. She'd filed for divorce and moved out because she fell out of love with him and was seeing someone else. I was baffled. Before I could say anything, she said that whatever was happening in her life was her business and she didn't need my advice. She wanted a civil relationship and asked to move in as soon as possible since she had to leave her friend's place. I told her it became my business when she demanded to live in my house with some random guy. I lost my temper at her attitude and said she should live with her new boyfriend since she preferred that, even though her mom wanted us to be a family. This triggered her, and she angrily accused me of emotionally abusing her and behaving like her dad, who refused to talk to her or offer a place to stay. That's when it clicked. She wasn't here to build a relationship because she had nowhere else to go after her dad abandoned her again. My wife and I had warned her not to trust him, but she was too arrogant to listen. told her she should have seen it coming from a man who caused her mom so much grief. She said she thought her mom made up those stories to make her like me. I reminded her that she didn't have to see me as her dad or even like me, but that didn't change the truth about her father. However, I realized there was no point in revisiting the past. I told her I wasn't comfortable with her and her husband living in the house, but would let her stay for a few months if they paid rent and stayed in the basement. I gave her a week to decide. She became enraged, saying this was her mother's house and I had no right to deny her. Second update. It's been a crazy week. After writing my last update, I contacted my stepdaughter to ask if she had made her decision. She angrily told me she would never pay rent for living in her own house and didn't care that I'm the owner because she believed I manipulated her mom into leaving the house to me. I didn't want to get into an unnecessary argument, so I just told her I was glad she made her decision. The next day, I had to leave for a 2-day business trip. I locked up the house as usual and left around 8:00 in the morning. After finishing the first day of meetings, I decided to check my home security camera. I knew things would be fine because I had alarms in place in case of a break-in, but I was bored and had nothing else to do. Guess what I saw? Around noon, my stepdaughter and her new boyfriend entered the house with a couple of suitcases. They went back and forth, bringing in more stuff. I was baffled. I'll admit the passcode wasn't very strong. It's my wedding anniversary, but we live in a very safe neighborhood and almost never have break-ins. I didn't know what to do at first. I was so angry at her audacity that I thought of calling the police. Then I decided it might be better to call her first and talk it over, but she had blocked me, and I didn't have her boyfriend's number. I called the home phone, but no one answered, as expected. I considered asking a neighbor to check in, but decided against it because I didn't want to bother anyone. I tried her phone one last time, but it didn't work. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, so I did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. I also spoke with my boss to let him know I might be late to the next day's meetings and explained the situation a bit. Thankfully, he was reasonable and told me it was all right. I checked out of my hotel and drove home. It took about 4 hours, and it was past midnight by the time I arrived, but at least I made it. I called the police a bit before reaching home and told them the truth. My stepdaughter had illegally broken in with her boyfriend. I waited for the cops to arrive. Long story short, they kicked them out. There was a lot of screaming and ridiculous accusations, and my neighbors gathered around my house. The cops had to talk her down and asked if I wanted to press charges. I had no interest in doing that. I just wanted my house back. I told her there was no need to make it more complicated and that she should just leave without creating a bigger scene. They did leave, but she threatened to sue me and said I'd regret treating her this way. I'm sure none of that actually means anything. Anyway, I immediately changed the passcode and made a note to talk to my lawyer to see if there was anything else I could do to keep her away from me in the house. Then I took a nap before driving back for my meetings. My lawyer suggested a restraining order, but I don't think that's necessary right now. I'll look into that if she does something again, but for now, we're good. I wish my wife were here so I didn't have to deal with this in the first place, but I guess that's neither here nor there. Third update. I know it has been a few months since my last update, but if anyone is still reading, I have a little update for you. My stepdaughter reached out to me again. She texted, asking if we could talk, so I called her. She apologized for entering the house without my permission and said she had decided to break up with her boyfriend. She spent the money left to her by her mom to pay off his debt, and he was the one forcing her to convince me to let them stay in the house. She admitted her mistakes and asked if she could stay in the basement if she'd agreed to pay rent. I'm not a monster, so I told her she should have been honest with me from the start. I told her she could move in whenever she wanted and wouldn't have to pay rent. I did make it clear this was a temporary arrangement and that she would have to start looking for a job or think about going back to college. She promised to get back on her feet soon and wouldn't be a bother. She's currently living with a friend and is supposed to move in soon. I hope things will be all right between us because I know that's what her mom would have wanted. I'm still skeptical, though, and I've made it clear she has to be honest with me, be responsible with her money, and pay rent every month. Fourth update. It has been 2 months since my stepdaughter moved in, and I'm happy to say things have been going well. Things are still a little awkward between us, but at least it's cordial instead of tense. It gives me a lot of peace to think this is what my wife would have wanted. The kid has also been excellent with paying rent on time and is even thinking of going back to college to finish her degree. I'm happy to see her doing well.